And customers of 88 Bank of Ireland branches are using its local services for the last time today, including those in Carnew, Rathdrum and Tinahely. The closures were announced last March as part of the bank's downsizing plans and shift towards online services. Some of the bank services, such as cash withdrawals and lodgements, will now be available through the post office network instead, if there's one available. On the line, we're joined by General Secretary from the Financial Services Union, John O'Connell. Morning, John.
Good morning, Declan.
Good morning. So there was pretty uproar about this last March, and seemingly, Bank of Ireland didn't listen to any of the concerns, and it's going ahead. So obviously you and your members feel unhappy about that this morning.
Totally, and firstly I'd just like to acknowledge our colleagues in Carnew and Rathdrum and Tinahely who will be working in the bank in those locations for the last time today, and acknowledge their service to their communities. And I'm a member of the Culture Board, and the Culture Board has a survey, and it clearly shows that people respect and enjoy the service they get from face-to-face interactions with people like our colleagues in Carnew, Rathdrum and Tinahely, and that has come through survey after survey. Where people have the issue, and the continuing trust issue, is corporately with banks, how banks behave, decisions like this. But on a day-to-day basis, people really respect and reflect that in surveys time and time again of the service and commitment they get from people on the ground in the banks.
Now, the bank are saying that services will be available in the post office. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and for transactional services, that will be the case. But you're going to be joining a bigger queue in the post office because the post office has quite a busy network and dealing with all the payments and transactions that they currently deal with. But you'll be able to do your transactional business in the post office. The issue is, where do you go to do your business that you really usually visit a branch? I'd visit a branch if I was taking out a car loan, if I was doing a little bit to the house, if I was getting a mortgage and so forth. Those are the key life issues if you're a farmer going in, talking in terms of overdrafts or loans for livestock and crops and so forth. So those are the real life situation that people will see evaporate today, because we know from a study done in the UK that a closure of a branch in a location can result in a drop in lending of up to 64% in that community. And this is at a time when people are just emerging from the pandemic. The government supports are gradually being withdrawn. And I think everybody in the country, except apparently the banks, are at one in terms of supporting SMEs getting back on their feet. We called for this closure to be postponed. Let there be a debate about the future of banking. But unfortunately, the bank has decided to proceed. The debate is taking place, and I do think that's very, very important to note, that cross-party, cross-government, and equally across the opposition supports this. And this is a north and south issue in terms of developing a banking forum where we as a society can discuss what type of banking system do we want. We know that if we leave banking to the bankers, that instances like today is what's facing us into the future. So we have to have a more stakeholder approach to our banking system.
Don't the banks have a point, though, that most people are now moving over to doing things online when they do bank transactions or whatever? Then, you could ask them, when was the last time you were in a bank? Say, oh gosh, I haven't been in a bank in ages. And if the post office is picking up some of other type of transactions, it leaves a very small percentage of interaction with the bank to the ones that are being missed out, and are usually the ones that are occasional. You mentioned maybe a car loan. If somebody lived in Rathdrum, can't they go into Wicklow Town because they go into Wicklow Town for other things? It's that sort of major transactions that are so seldom that, yes, it is an inconvenience of not having the bank around the corner, but it doesn't happen very often that it could be a trip to the nearest big town.
Well, I suppose the banks themselves did surveys, and what those surveys said was, yes, people would stay away from banks during the pandemic because that's what they were asked to do. They were asked to only make essential journeys, to restrict your movements to 2 kilometres, then 5 kilometres, and so forth. So the basis or the statistics that were produced to say that there has been a drop on footfall in the banks are based on pandemic figures, whereas in its own survey, the Banking Payments Federation did a survey during the pandemic, and people overwhelmingly said that they would return to their banking in their branches and so forth post-pandemic. And so, yes, there will be a certain transmission to digitization and to digital methods and so forth. But nobody can gainsay that we have a state-of-the-art broadband system in this country. So saying to somebody in Carnew or Rathdrum, sure, you can go online and do whatever you want, isn't always the case, because we don't have a developed broadband system yet. So I think our argument was that this is premature. It's taken advantage of the pandemic, and it's punishing communities for adhering to the government guidelines. And there is quite a swathe of people who rely on cash in society. Even when you hear the amount of people that have converted to tap and so forth, there's still a large swathe of people who rely on banks and cash to conduct their business, whether they're businesses or whether they're individuals. And we have to be a holistic society and take everybody's situation into account. So we think it was premature. We think it could have been delayed. We think the debate will take place, which we very much welcome, and the banks are going to participate, I understand. But we as a society must have a say in the type of banking system that we want.
It's very unfortunate for South Wicklow because Tinhealy and Carnew are so close together, and two in a sort of general area to go will certainly be an inconvenience. There probably won't be a clamour to restore the banks, though, John. To restore those branches.
No, look, we understand that, but there's still branch networks in the country. There's still other banks with extensive branch networks and so forth, and that's why we still think there's time to have this debate. Our trade union is probably one of the most progressive trade unions in the country. We're not afraid of change. We embrace change. We embrace technology way back to when ATMs were introduced and so forth. So we have no fear of it. But in terms of how change comes about, both for communities and staff, is where the real debate needs to take place.
So finally, John, your members, how are they affected by this?
So in terms of each bank is going through its own transformation program. So in the sector at the moment, there is a lot of redundancies. Thankfully, these staff are members of the trade union, which insists that it's a voluntary situation. So anybody that's leaving the bank is on the basis of a voluntary exit. The banks have also given other options to staff, which is to transfer to another location or to work from home. So I suppose it just outlines the benefit of being a trade union member and having people to fight on your behalf to ensure that at times of change that there's an accommodation, a reasonable accommodation. Our preference would be that nobody would leave the bank and that no branch would close, but we're realistic around that and have represented people to ensure that the best possible outcome in the situation is arrived at for them.
A couple of texts in, all the same message, really. It's been recently shown that electronic banking is not secure. There's been a lot of that instances. So, a lot of people highlighting that. And certainly, recently, as this texter says, there have been question marks over security. Does that aid your case, or is that just, during the transition, and that'll be sorted eventually?
I think it feeds into that debate that we want about the future of banking. So yes, IT security is something we're all very, very conscious of now, how we could be impacted, the amount of fraud and criminality, texts and messages and so forth that you're trying to decipher. Is this an appropriate message or is this a fake message? Equally, the other issue is artificial intelligence, where machine learned algorithms are installed to deal with matters, and again, it has to be part of the debate in terms of what's the regulation around that and what's the human intervention in relation to that. And that can be anything from recruiting people. There has to be a human intervention somewhere along the line. It can't just be based on algorithms and so forth. And equally for your banking. You know, we only have 3 banks left. What if one bank, through an algorithm, says, actually, we're not going to give you credit? Your options are so limited now with just 3 banks. This is why we need to have a debate. And I would, reach out to the people in Carnoon, Rathrum, Tinnahealy and Wicklow indeed, in terms of when that forum is set up. Participate, have your voice heard in terms of the type of banking system that we want in the country. We want a secure one, obviously. We also want one that respects stakeholders, and that's all stakeholders, from somebody with a small deposit right up to businesses and so forth. So I think the debate that's going to ensue very soon is really, really important.
Very good. We'll watch out for that. John O'Connell there, General Secretary from the Financial Services Union.